as you see, I am a very highly managed individual, which is good, which is very good. Yeah. 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 Organization is not my strong point. Yeah. I guess, big picture people or visionaries or whatever you call them don't tend to organize well. So we need people like Don and Keith to organize these events, otherwise they just wouldn't take place. All right, I've been taking extra time with these questions because they've all been very foundational, and I want everybody to kind of get up to speed a little bit on what it's about. I'll try to pick up the pace and make them a little shorter once we kind of lay the background for understanding what's going on. So do we have someone with a mic? Oh, I've been asked to explain what the immersives are. Immersives are events that Keith, the man over here, and Donna, who just spoke to you, that's MBT Events, by the way. They are MBT Events. And they organize these events so that I'm able to help people interact with the larger reality. Because I tell people, I'm probably the only speaker who tells his audience, at least all my talks, well, not these kind of talks, but all my workshops and things that I do, the last thing I tell people is, don't believe a word I say. And that's unusual for most speakers. But I say that because believing it is not useful. Not believing it is not useful. You need to experience it. If it's not your experience, it cannot be your truth. You can read about other people's truths and you can listen to other people's experience, but until it's yours, your only choice is to believe it or not believe it. And neither of those are useful. You have to have your own evidence, your own experience. So after I told so many people that, they came to me and said, all right, are you going to help us get that experience? So I started doing these immersives, which are for people to teach them how to get their own evidence and their own experience. We talk about communicating with other entities, both dead and alive. We talk about communicating with people here and elsewhere. We talk about remote viewing and healing and a lot of other things like that. It's a 4-day course, sometimes a 5-day course, depending on how intense we want to make it. It is intense because when it starts till it ends 3 or 4 days later, we spend 12, 13 hours a day with each other. The rest of the day is either eating or going to the bathroom or sleeping. So that's all that gets done. It's work or taking care of your needs. No time for anything else. It's intensive because you learn faster in an intensive environment when you're learning things that require your being level or intuitive space. If you do those kinds of things piecemeal, you don't learn them very quickly. It takes longer to get there. If you do them intensively, you can get it quicker. So those are going on. We have a bunch of them in the US, and we have the next one's going to be in Italy next year. And we have some at different levels. Some of them are expensive because for those 4 days, like I say, you don't have time to do anything else, so all your food, your lodging, all of that's taken care of. That's all available, so it's part of the price. And we like to put them in very nice and pleasant places because it's hard to learn intuitive space things if you're not comfortable. And it's easier to learn it if you're in a place of some beauty and some quiet and nature and serene places. So we try to put them in places that are uplifting and not the opposite. So that's what the immersives were. Is that good enough? Okay. Now, we're back to the questions. Somebody has a mic?
Hi Tom, hi everyone, hope you are all well. I have a lot of questions, but just two main items. The first is, when I'm right, you are assuming, that's a question directly regarding your big toe, you are assuming two things to make that model working, is that right? And maybe that you can explain these two assumings a bit for me. After that, maybe I will ask the second question.
What are the two assumings?
The assumptions that your model is based
Oh,
on.
the assumptions that the model's based on.
Yeah.
Okay. It is based on two assumptions. And those are one, that basically that consciousness exists, that consciousness is. The fact that we are all sitting here and we're all conscious means it's not such a wild assumption. But you have to do that. That consciousness has to come into the model as an assumption, because it's not something that can be derived. The beginning of consciousness, where did consciousness come from, is a question that is not answerable. And the reason it's not answerable is that we are consciousness. And things that are part of a system cannot firsthand experience the creation of that system of which they are a part, you see, because they didn't exist before the system existed. They're part of that system. So we're consciousness, and there's no way for us to really get firsthand information about how that consciousness first existed. It's just one of those things that you can't know. We can't get out, because we are consciousness, we can't get outside of consciousness to look at it from an objective viewpoint. We're inside of it. So that's the trap. So you can't say exactly where consciousness originated from. Now, you can do some hand waving. Hand waving is kind of a physics term, which means it's not really good logic. You just kind of have some rough idea. You know, it's a kind of a stretch of a hypothesis. That's what hand waving is. That's when you talk and you have to do this to get people to understand you, because your logic isn't there. You know, cover the holes with emotion rather than with logic. Well, I can make some of those in a sequence of how it might have occurred, but there's still holes in it. You know, it's not a good logical thing. You can find it on Stanford philosophy. Stanford University, it's a California university, and they have a very strong philosophy department. And if you look at cellular automata and get around in that part of it, it's on the internet from Stanford, you can find a discussion of this in a lot of detail. But it starts out with the idea that you have a potential. And if you have a potential, of course, the question is, where'd that potential come from, and how did that potential get there? And of course, again, there's no way to say that. But so you always start with some sort of an assumption, even if it's that you have a potential. And then there is actually it's kind of a mathematical thing that says that if you have a potential with a lot of possibilities, just randomly, those possibilities will sometimes connect in a way that they create something that then can continue. In other words, you can get order out of chaos if you're patient. If the system has that capability to produce chaos or order, it will eventually happen. So you take that idea and marry it to the idea of cellular automata, which is you have a very simple little rule set, a simple rule set that iterates, and you have something, it's that something that just happened out of that chaos, and this rule set will operate on that condition and produce something else. And then that same little rule set will operate on that something else to produce something else again. It's an iterative thing, right? And out of that iteration, you can create very complex outcomes. And I call those in my books a process fractal. You know, we have geometric fractals where you take different geometries like triangles, and you put triangles on triangles on triangles and different levels, different sizes, and you end up with a fractal pattern that is, you can end up with fractal patterns that have no end. You can just keep building. They don't get to a point where there's nothing you can do. They just keep going and going and going, and they get hugely complex. You can do the same thing with a process. You get a little process that's simple, but if you keep working so that the output becomes the input, work the process again, the output becomes input, you end up with something that's hugely complex. It's not a geometric fractal, it's a process fractal. Evolution is a process fractal. Okay, so if you start with these simple ideas of getting something out of chaos, and with cellular automata being that little something that you got was a little rule set, simple little rule set, that you can build up something rather large with it. So again, you'll get the details of that if you want to look that up at Stanford's philosophy thing, and they've got like 30 or 40 pages of that, and why at least some philosophers think that's rational to think that way. But I just start with consciousness exists and it has certain properties. Okay? In order to have, well, what consciousness is it's awareness. It has awareness. It's aware of itself and an environment. So self-awareness and awareness of other. Okay, so if you give it that property, then you also have to give it time, because it was, well, I'm aware and now I'm unaware, or I'm aware of this, then I'm aware of that. If there's change, there must be time. Without time, there is no change. Without change, nothing ever happens. It's just static and stays there. So with consciousness comes in time. Consciousness is about choice and awareness. Awareness of what to be aware of is a choice, and what to do about it, if anything, if you're aware of it. So you need choice. Awareness requires memory. Otherwise, every choice is your first, if you have no memory of the last one. So for it to grow, you have to have memory. You have to have feedback, so that you make a choice and you make another choice. That's time and that's memory. But do the choices add up to anything? Can you combine those two things? Can you do something with it? Well, that recalls feedback. You have to get some sense of what you're doing and where you want to go with it, so that your awareness can direct your choice. Direction requires feedback. And the last thing you need is purpose. If you don't have a purpose, then your choices are all random. They're all irrelevant. They just don't build into anything. You need to have something that is what it is you want to do, what you're trying to achieve. With consciousness, there's just one purpose, and that is to lower entropy, which is to create more choices, if you like, to create content, to create structure, organization. If you have possibilities, and we'll say that initial thing that had potential was just a field of randomness, all random bits. Well, there's no information there. But you order those bits, the order creates information. And then you can take that order, and from that order, let's say the order might be to define a 1 and a 0. Just a binary, hot, cold, whatever. Once you have a binary, then of course you have a language that you can create. You have 1s and 0s, and then you can have patterns of 1s and 0s, and then you can have patterns of patterns of patterns, and you can ascribe meaning to those patterns. You can make the patterns represent symbols that represent other things, and as that information becomes useful, then that lowers entropy. So that's kind of the idea of consciousness and why you have to start with consciousness. The one thing I didn't mention is that when consciousness exists, you also have choice. And that choice, to be a choice, has to be free. If it's not a free choice, it's not a choice. You see, just the word choice requires that it's your choice. You can be this way or that way. You can be aware of this or aware of that. So you have to also have free will. So time, free will are both logically necessary for consciousness. You can't have consciousness without time. You can't have consciousness without free will. Without free will, there's no choice. Without choice, there's no way to construct anything, to create information, to create order. Okay? And without time, creation is an oxymoron. Creation means you have something now that you didn't have before, and if you've got a before and after, then you've got time. So all of those things come in together. But time at that level doesn't have to be regular time like a metronome or a clock. It can just be an awareness of difference, that things are different now than they were then. I've made different choices, and I'm aware of different things. So that's what that assumption is. It brings all of that stuff into the model right at the beginning. And I tried real hard to go back further than that. In my model, what I ended up doing is creating the smallest piece of consciousness I could think of. I called it a consciousness cell, I believe. And that was just an awareness that could be in two states, state one or state two. And that was it. And if you start with that, you can evolve all the rest. Evolution, that little engine that keeps putting output into input, can evolve everything else that we have now that falls under the heading of consciousness. But it just can start there. But I couldn't make it start any simpler place. So that's why it's an assumption. The other assumption that I have is that evolution exists. Well, that's pretty obvious. In order to just not make a random something that would probably just as well randomly disappear, you have to have this process fractal going on. You have to have a process that generates things. That's how you end up with a very complex reality. Otherwise, it would always stay simple if it couldn't build on itself. Building on itself basically means that there's evolution. So those are the two things. So evolution is like the engine, and consciousness is like the media. And those two things then can create everything else. So that's why I bring those in. And it's interesting because all of those things, consciousness, time, and free will, are all things that are antithetical, logically antithetical, to materialism. Materialism requires determinism, which says there's no time, there's no consciousness, these are all illusions, and there's no free will. So you see, logically, those are opposites. They're antithetical with each other. So if you're a materialist, then there is no time, there is no consciousness, there is no free will, because those things are incompatible with materialism. So that's kind of the philosophical things. You draw these opposite corners, kind of the opposite poles. And whereas materialism sees consciousness, time, and free will as illusions, if you start at the other end and you accept consciousness, free will, and time, then the idea of determinism and materialism are illusions. They just things seem to be deterministic, Time seems to be an illusion. So that's the logical basis, for like my theories over here, and materialism's on the opposite end, and everything that I say is right, they say is illusion, and everything that they say is right, I see as an illusion. So it's a real clear separation in logic and logical space between the two ideas. But that's what those two assumptions, where they come in and the significance of them.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Tom. It's much more clear for me, I think. It helps quite a lot. The second item I have is when I had some out-of-body experience, what I never tried to get, but that happens suddenly in strange situations. One of the situations I had several times was when I was paragliding. I'm paragliding, and I was on a safety training above the sea. There was a trainer on microphone, and he's telling you what you should do. And he tried to show the others so it is on a video. And he tried to show the others something happened to me. He tried to show the others, and then my glider did crazy stuff like jumping. And right in the moment when the paraglider was in front of me, underneath in front of me, everything stopped. I was totally relaxed, and nothing was moving. And then I can remember the lines in front of me, nothing moving. I turned around to the right side, there was a beach, people, everything was absolute standing frozen. And that I was not thinking about that. I was just looking at that. And then I turned around and thought, okay, when it is going ahead, what should I do that I get the best result? Yeah? Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, okay, I'm junking down, and then I take the brake on the left, and then it was going ahead. And then I forgot it somehow. After that, I did some full stalls. You're stalling the glider, and then you are falling back. And always when I was falling back, that happens. When I did that the 10th time, it happens never, because I was not so excited, I think. Yeah? Not so concentrated, because it was usual to do that. The time stopped. And then when I was motorbiking very fast in the Alps, that was different. I was motorbiking very concentrated, and we were in a group. I was in the 5th position, then on the 4th, and everybody was gone. And then I was biking alone without thinking about that. And then suddenly I was above the trees. Silence, relaxed, looking around. Oh, nice. The Alps, trees, a road, a motorbike. It's turning around. I thought, oh, motorbike, turning left. And then I thought, oh, that's me. And poof, I was back. And I was driving. And now my question is, who was driving that bike when I was out of it? So I'm thinking about that. After I'm thinking a lot of that, I'm more and more coming to the situation that I'm thinking, oh, maybe that it was not moving. That I just was thinking that it was moving. But I'm pretty sure it was moving without me. That's my second question. Who was driving that bike?
Well, I think maybe the other question would have maybe even been better, is who was viewing from up above the trees? Well, it is easy enough to parallel process and be in more than one reality at a time. You can be here doing things, and you can be not here doing things. You can be riding a motorcycle, and you can be observing yourself riding a motorcycle from 300 feet. Those things are not incompatible. You can parallel process. One of them, is on, you might say, on automatic. They're riding the motorcycle. Sometimes people drive cars that way. They get home, suddenly they look around like, how did I get here? They don't remember the last half hour of driving because their mind was someplace else. Well, they were still driving, and they were stopping at red lights, and they were doing all the things they needed to do, but their mind was someplace else. And that mind could have been 200 feet in the air watching them drive, but that's boring, so it's probably not what you do. But that kind of parallel processing is a common enough thing that you can do more than one thing at a time and more than one reality at a time. So who was on the motorcycle? It was you. It was your avatar. It was still on the motorcycle. It wasn't your body that was up there in the clouds. Your body was on the motorcycle driving it competently, and you were aware. You had your awareness split part of your awareness was looking at the road and driving the motorcycle. Another part of your awareness was in the air, looking down at yourself. And it's, when your consciousness, when you realize you're not your body, that you're consciousness, then the fact that you could get two data streams, one data stream from the perspective of 300 feet, the other data stream from the perspective of the rider on the motorcycle, that's not so hard to understand. You might ask the question, why would I get two data streams? Well, probably because you had it could be several reasons. One, you may have some idea of seeing yourself from a larger perspective. Here you are, you're part of the scenery, you're part of the woods, you're in, you're zigging and zagging, and you kind of feel a part of everything. Like you say, you kind of get in a zone where you're not really intellectually thinking anymore. Now you're in an intuitive space. And from an intuitive space, you might have had a little question just happen to flit through your mind, not your intellect, but it's your thinking at the intuitive level of seeing yourself from a bigger picture, seeing yourself as a part of this scene rather than just being on the motorcycle. The motorcycle being separate from the bigger picture. And because of that, you got data both ways. If you just open yourself up to these things, you can have all sorts of perspectives. It's like you were remote viewing yourself riding the motorcycle, if you want to put it into pigeonhole terms. Not that unusual. It's if you had tried to do it, you probably would never be able to do it. But when you just open yourself to that possibility, when you just get to that point where you let the intellect go, all kinds of things can happen.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a real thing. It's just the way it's an artifact of being consciousness that you can do those kinds of things.
It's very nice for me that these things happen because I'm very, there's no fear in me. Whatever will happen, I will be able to solve that somehow because it's getting relaxed in a stress situation, very relaxed, and I have all the time I need to do something. That I'm convinced about that now. Yeah.
That's what lets it happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Tom. I was wondering about the effects of, Wi-Fi. All the cell phones that we have, obviously carrying some sort of frequency. My question is that all just, again, like previously with the neutrinos, is it just information and it doesn't have any effect on the virtual avatar? Or should we be aware of that and, if necessary, do anything to mitigate that? And also, how does the fact that we evolve more and more into this electronic culture impact our connection to the LCS and our ability to switch data streams?
Okay. The first question, it's a matter of the rule set. The rule set determines our biology and what affects the biology. So if the rule set is such that all of the radiation, all the electromagnetic radiation that is streaming through our bodies creates a problem for our biology, makes us ill in some way, gives us cancer or some other kind of a problem, then yes, that could be a problem. It's just, does the rule set support that or not? Well, from my understanding of the biology and electromagnetic radiation, if the radiation is strong enough, yes, there's a biological effect. It's usually a matter of how strong. There's electromagnetic radiation going through us all the time, even if all the electronics, in our world were turned off. There's electromagnetic radiation, everywhere. So our bodies are well adapted to an electromagnetic experience. We're not that sensitive to it, but when it gets real strong, we tend to be sensitive to it. Particular parts of the body are more sensitive than others. The brain tends to be more sensitive to it. The reproductive organs tend to be more sensitive to it. So we have yet to discover whether or not walking around all day with a cell phone transmitting and receiving stuck next to your head, the long-term effects of that, we don't know. That's still up in the air. Whether, say, brain tumors start to become, much, much more common than they were 50 years ago or not, because we haven't had that much exposure yet. The kids now who, since they were 10 years old, walking around with a cell phone stuck to their ear, that's kind of a new phenomena just in the last 20 years. And 20 years isn't really a long enough time for things like that. Radiation is a statistical thing. You can get radiation and walk out and never have a problem, or it may cause a problem. It's the statistical function. How much radiation did you get and where did you get it is very important. But still, it's only probability that you have a problem or not. So I suspect in another 20 or 30 years, we'll get an answer to that if we see a lot of illnesses. So should we be concerned about it? I'd say yes, you should be concerned about it. Could it be a health problem? Yes. Do we know for a fact that it is a health problem? Probably not yet, but there's been research done. Last time I looked at this topic, there was like 20 or 30 different research projects were listed. And if you took all of them together, you found that it was inconclusive. 50-50, about half of them said, oh yeah, it's going to cause serious problems. The other half said, nah, not really. But then when you took away all of those researches, all that research that was funded by the cell phone companies, you took all that research and say, okay, if they were funded by the cell phone companies, we're not going to count it. We're going to delete that. Then it was about 80% agreed that there was a problem. So you can do with that information as you will. But it looks like there is likely a problem. It's just how big is it and how serious is it? I don't think anybody knows yet. But that's the way our culture works. We just do stuff if it's useful, and we find out later whether it's going to kill us or not. We don't worry about things like that too much. That's just our nature. We do things, and we, even if you know that there are risks. I mean, driving an automobile is a risk, but everybody does it every day because it's so convenient. It's so much better than walking, particularly as we have spread ourselves and all the things we have to do out, not just in a little village, but all over the place. Then, those kinds of things become, we'll take the risk. So, you can tell the world right now cell phones might be a problem to your health, but I don't think it would make much dent in the market because they're a part of how we are now, and people will use them, and the only thing that'll make a dent is when people start showing signs of, illness related to the cell phone use, and then the companies will redesign their cell phone to eliminate the radiation. That makes the cell phone more expensive and heavier. Nobody wants a more expensive, heavy cell phone, so we'll wait and see. That's the way we work. That's kind of human nature. So, yes, it is something to be concerned about, though. And the thing with radiation is that it's the intensity of the radiation that seems to be important. I mean, like I say, we get low-level radiation all the time just from the sun. Produces all kinds of particles are zooming around, and we live in a magnetic field created by the earth, and we got lots of E&M fields through us all the time, but they're very, very weak fields. They're not real strong fields. If you are, let's say you have a cell phone. If you take that cell phone and just hold it out here, well, the amount of radiation you get goes down as the square of the distance. Okay, so if I had it here at 1 inch, and now I go out here at 12 inches, That's 144 times, right, 12 squared, that's 144 times less radiation just to move it out here. And if I move it, over there, then you get a square, much bigger number, and pretty soon you're down into the small levels again. So the problem seems to be only if it's real close to you. Does the field get strong enough to be a problem? But it's not just cell phones, it's all sorts of things. All of our communications are problematical. Sometimes people live under power lines and they find they get illnesses and things, but other people live under power lines and it doesn't seem to bother them. Inconclusive for the most part.
Okay, thank you. The second quick question I had was building on the previous, which is parallel processing. Obviously, to you, it happened accidentally, but how do you, step by step, perhaps as a beginner, start to slowly parallel process? Could you give us a little guide?
That's a good question. The best way that I think is to learn to parallel process, purposefully learn it, is with your meditation. All of these things that we're talking about consciousness, okay? And when you meditate, you basically get in touch with your consciousness. You experience your consciousness. And you tend to let go of the data stream that defines the physical world. So to be in that state and to be able to let go of the physical world, you meditate. Most people, when they start to meditate, they have to be in a quiet, sometimes even dark space. They have to be sitting down or lying down. They have to kind of isolate themselves. And you learn to experience your consciousness in that way, but you're limited to that way. If you want to learn to parallel process, you have to make that ability to get in touch with your consciousness more robust. And you do that by learning to meditate while you're, if you always meditate lying down, then learn to meditate sitting up or vice versa. And if you can do either one of those equally, then learn to meditate standing up. Then learn to meditate standing up on one foot or walking around. Walk around in a park, because now you have to process so you don't step in a hole or run into somebody. You're processing a little bit here, right? But you still are in that meditation state. And then learn to process in places that are busy or noisy, on a bus, sitting down on a bench in a mall, places where there's just lots of hubbub and action going on. And as you get to where your meditation is more and more robust, you find that you can easily get into a meditation state anywhere, under any conditions. You can drop into that state very quickly, and it doesn't require you to sit down or lie down or even say your mantra or pay attention to your breathing or anything. It's just something you learn to do because it's so robust. It's not a delicate thing that you have to sneak up on, over 20 minutes. You can just turn it on, turn it off. That's when you can parallel process. So that would be the way to do it. Just keep meditating in more and more difficult situations. You will find that when you first do this, it's very hard. If you always meditate sitting in a chair, you lie down on a bed and try to meditate, it just won't seem to work. It won't feel right. You won't get those same body sensations that you're familiar with that let you know that you're having a good meditation state. And most people will say, it's just not where I can't meditate lying down. It doesn't work for me. But it will work for you if you keep working on it. It'll just be difficult at first, but then it'll get easier and easier and easier. Then go back to sitting down and then back to lying down. And pretty soon it doesn't matter. That's what I mean. Just keep pressing that to more and more complex situations. Walking around in a park is good because then you have to parallel process some. And eventually it is easy to parallel process. Parallel processing isn't any different than watching picture-in-a-picture on a TV. Digital TVs now. You can kind of have this ball game and that ball game and that ball game all on your big screen TV all at the same time, because you can break it into 3 smaller TVs if you like. If you've got a more advanced digital TV, picture-in-picture, and now you're parallel processing. You're watching 3 games all at the same time. And in the beginning, you tend to serially process. You look at this one a little bit, then you look at that one a little bit, and then you look at that one, and you go back and you just kind of serially run through them. But eventually, you don't. You just look at them all, and your attention jumps to those places where something interesting is going on. And you don't really miss anything unless really something interesting is going on more than one at the same time. But usually that's not the case. So you get to the point where you just kind of look like you're staring kind of blankly at the whole thing, but your attention will snap to wherever the interesting stuff is. So that's just it's parallel processing. It's not a hard thing to learn, but it takes practice.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Can we just let go and trust that the larger consciousness system gives us the perfect learning environment for us and just be in the moment?
Yes, we can, but we have to caveat that with there's some things we still have to pay attention to. So to a degree, not only can we do that, but that is the right way to do it. We should do that. Your life in general should be authentic. That means you are exactly who you are, not living an image. And mostly we don't know that we're living images because we don't think about it that much, but we tend to live images because our culture gives us images. Our culture tells us this is the proper way, this is the right way, this is the way that works. And we tend to be that way because that's what our culture tells us. We accept that. And there's a lot of other things. The advertisers would like to make you think that there's certain things you should do and not do. Of course, the things you should do is buy their product. But they will also try to convince you that there's right ways and wrong ways of being. And pretty soon we are trying to shoehorn ourselves into this properness of doing things the way that is expected of us in our culture, things that are expected of us by our family or by our parents or our grandparents. We do things that the right path is to go to school, then go to college, then get a good job and have 2.5 children, live in the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. That is the way forward. And a lot of people just lockstep, march down that path because that's part of the cultural beliefs they have. So that's what I mean by living an image. But most people are like that. And you tell people, you ask people, well, who are you really, authentically, down at the core? Who are you? And most people don't have a clue. They define themselves in terms of, well, I'm this profession. Oh, I'm a father, I have this many children, or I'm a wife and I do these things. They start to define themselves in terms of what they do, of whether they're rich or poor or whatever. We define ourselves in terms of lots of things. Define ourselves by gender. I'm female, therefore I am this way, or whatever. So that's living somebody else's idea of who you are. So becoming authentic is a key thing. And when you're authentic, you do tend to live in the moment. You do tend to focus on just what you're doing and not do it like a zombie, but do it because you're doing it on purpose. And if it's not worth doing on purpose, then maybe you should do something else. So that's good. But the caveat comes in is that you still have to pay the rent. You still have to find food to eat and shelter. You still have to, take care of your family, whatever. You've got responsibilities to other people. And in those responsibilities to other people, there are constraints on what you can do and what you can't do. But those are constraints that you welcome, because responsibility is part of your growing up. Fear is about self. Love is about other. When it's about other, you're succeeding in your growth, but it also creates a lot of constraints, because when it's about other, it's about other. It's not about you. So those others put constraints. Oh, I have to do this. I have to remember to, stop by the grocery store and get this on the way home because my wife asked me to do that, and she's counting on that for dinner. You have to keep track of things. So responsibility other than puts a lot of constraints of things that you need to do. But these also, because you care, are things you want to do, because being useful to others is an important part of your life. So it works both ways. The constraints you put on yourself, if they're your own through your choice, because you're connected to other, those are good. The constraints that are put on your life just because of your culture or because of your belief or because of the church you go to or because of whatever, those are generally not so good. They're imposed on you from the outside, and they're not yours. You're just going through the motions. And that's generally not so good. So it depends. You can't just be free. It's just me, and it's only about me, and I'll do just what I want. That may be authentic, but it's not going to take you very far as evolving your consciousness. If you evolve your consciousness, you have to care. You have to be connected. And that caring and that connected to other people will create constraints. But those are wonderful constraints. Those are constraints that you enjoy, not constraints that annoy you. They're positive constraints. So it's not to get rid of all constraints. It's to get rid of those constraints that aren't yours, that you take on anyway just because you think you should. So yes, being present in the moment, always. The opposite of that is being a zombie. You're just doing things because that's what you're supposed to do. And that's the only reason you're doing it. Not because you have your heart in it or you care about it. You do it because that's your life. And you just go through life, chug, 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 turning that crank around and around and around, and you have no heart in it. You're not connected to it. You're kind of lost in a machine, and you feel like you're this cog in a bigger machine, and you have no purpose because it's not your purpose. You somehow got stuck in this machine. That's not helpful. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change what you do. It just means you have to change the way you look at it. You have to change your attitude. You may go through all those same things and actually be present with them and do them because you want to do them. Well, I'm in this job, maybe not so much because I love the work, but it helps me support my family. It helps me do this, it helps me do that. Therefore, instead of grousing about it and saying, oh, I got to go to work again today, what a drag, you can see it differently. Just change an attitude and say, oh, there's another day, I get to support my family through this work, and while I'm at it, I might as well have a good time. I might as well learn things. I might as well get to know the people, get to connect with them and see if I can't make a difference, if I can't improve the process here. So you can have a positive attitude toward it, and now suddenly there's challenges for you. There's things for you to do, changes to make, interact with people. And then it becomes not such a drudgery, even though if the work itself is not all that great, just the interactions you have at work might be terrific. You might learn something. Getting close to people always helps you learn something. not only about them, but about yourself. So you can turn most anything into being positive, but if you're not doing it consciously, you're just trudging through it because that's what you do and you're in this rut, then that's when it becomes a negative. So that's what the point is about be here now, stay focused in the now. That means do things for a purpose because you want to. Not that you have to disassociate yourself and quit your job, but you have to take a new attitude toward that job to where you find the joy in it. Even if you're still turning that crank. That's just something you do. Now maybe if you're lucky you can find a crank you really enjoy turning, but that's probably a minority of people find that crank, because that would take a lot of change. You may find a crank that you really enjoy turning, but 5 years later or 10 years later, that crank gets to be pretty old. It doesn't matter what you do, even if you're doing brain surgery. After your 500th brain surgery, it's just a job. And you can get kind of jaded about anything. But that's because you've lost track of really why you're doing it. It's not about the brain surgery, it's about the people that you're going to help. It's not about what you're doing so much as how it helps others. And then you can feel good about that. And then you get to know your patients rather than just see them as a piece of meat that comes across on your conveyor belt. And you do something to them and push the button and they go off to somebody else. You get to see them as human beings and get connected with them, and you can feel something about it. So you can generally make anything into a pretty positive experience if you have the right attitude. Okay.
Hello, is this working? Yes, I guess. Hello, Tom. I'm really excited. My hands are sweating. I've been waiting for this moment like 6 years now, and I have a lot of questions in my mind. I've read your book 3 times, but I really want to ask a question for a good friend of mine. She's also very esoteric, and we are discussing a lot in the last time about the claiming of people to live without food. Mm-hmm. To live without food and even water, I guess. And I've been reading your books, and I'm really become more open-minded and skeptic. And I was really asking myself, is it possible to change the uncertainty principle that much, or to change the rule set that much with your intent that you can live without food?
Mm-hmm. Well, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, in a virtual reality, almost anything is possible. Virtual realities are hugely flexible. This is a data stream, right? The system can put whatever data it chooses in that data stream. Now, generally, it's restricted to only put data in the data stream that is in consonance with the rule set. Well, the rule set would say that we have to eat. We've got this biology and you have to feed it, right? But it's not necessary that that's what everybody gets in their data set. So why would the system do it any differently? Why would it step outside the rule set to do this? Well, there's one reason that kind of stands out above all the others, and that is it's an eye-opener. It gives you and your friends something to talk about. It's a thing that lets people see a bigger reality. It's one of those, what is going on there? That's crazy, but is it real? So it helps open people's minds to a bigger reality than just the material one. So the system does that all over. It does things that breaks the rules because it helps open people's minds up to a bigger picture. So you'll see that with individuals. You'll see that in groups. And it's kind of a constant thing in our experience. There's always these little things that happen, And they've probably happened to 2/3 of the people in here have probably had some sort of an experience that was not really explainable by, the rules. It just seems to flaunt the rules altogether. That's common. That's why most people show up in this room and come to listen to me talk, because they've had that kind of an experience before. And that experience opens their mind. A guy who helped me write my books by being an early reader and giving me criticism and telling me what he didn't understand was an engineer, lived in Canada. He had a dream one night about, he was on an airplane. And when he was on this airplane, he was very familiar with airplanes. Airplanes were kind of a hobby of his, so he knew the make and the model and whatever the airplane. It was clear to him what airplane he was on. And he saw that all the passengers were in black and white, except one little girl sitting somewhere in the middle was in color. And he had the inclination in his dream to study it, look very carefully at the people and who they were and where they were. He didn't know why, but he was there to see this airplane. That's what he felt. So he did. 2 days later, he read about an airplane crash where everybody was killed except one little girl. And he very quickly tried to look up what was the plane, where did it crash, and so on. And it was the same make and model of airplane. And he looked at the pictures, and it was the same little girl. So then he read the passenger as much as he could get data about passengers, and it all fit perfectly. And this engineer was a committed materialist who would not have, who would have sneered and snickered at anything that wasn't based strictly on a material concept. Well, that changed his life. He started looking on the internet for things about consciousness, things about precognitive dreams, things whatever, and that's how he bumped into me. And he was a heck of a nice guy, because he actually read my material more than anybody else. I think he read the books like 7 or 8 times as I wrote them. He would read them and give me feedback. But that's why he was interested. So he was out there searching. He went from a very hard-headed materialism viewpoint to a searcher that was looking for answers because it was his personal experience. Well, why did he have that dream? Why did he get that data stream in that dream? Well, the system gave him that because he was at a point where he was ready to grow. He needed a bigger picture. He needed something to kick him out of his rut. And that happens a lot. So the system does those kinds of things. Yes, they'll allow a bunch of people to, individuals, and he'll allow those individuals to get some press that it spreads around. And you can read a book by a lady, thinking maybe Australia. I can't remember her name anyway, but she lives without eating, if you were to read her book. But you also can look at the literature and you'll find that people over the last century or two, where people have written about them, have been able to do the same thing. It's not just her, but there's some lady who was in Britain who did that, and people watched her for months and didn't eat, didn't drink. She was very religious. She took a little communion wafers. It's the only thing she ate. That was like 1/10 of an ounce, and she'd do that once a day, and that was it. And she was very healthy and fine. So there's enough reporting of this that, I've never experienced that, although I did do a little experiment with it once, but I haven't really experienced that myself. But I've heard enough about it from a lot of different sources over different periods of time that it seems entirely plausible to me, because this is a virtual reality and the system can do anything and tends to do things just to wake people up. So when you run into these oddities that are hard to explain, often the explanation is just that. It's a wake-up call. Look at the crop circles that pop up different places in the world, and overnight, 25 acres of land get the growth on that land gets reorganized for this hugely complex design that would probably be hard to do in the daylight, with a team of 50 surveyors to make all the angles and all the things just right, but it happens overnight in the dark. And how does that happen? Well, we have our culture is very materialistic. So anything that we can't explain, the obvious explanation is the aliens do it. What else, right? We don't do it. We know we can't do it, so who else? It's a physical, if you're a materialist, it has to be some other physical thing, and so the aliens do it. But mostly, it's the larger conscious system that does it, and it's part of the bumping people into a bigger perspective. So yes, it is possible. Yogis have been known to do this over the last even couple of 100 years, where they don't eat much. I did a little experience with it once. I read this lady's book, who I can't remember her name, and I said, well, that's interesting. I'll have to see how that goes. So I fasted for 5 weeks. I didn't drink for the first 3 weeks at all, but I didn't do the way she said, because she said that you have to be quiet, you have to meditate, it's all part of a mental space, and it was that kind of a thing. It wasn't just something you did, but I didn't do that. I went to work every day. It was just my regular day. I didn't change my life at all. I just stopped eating and drinking for a while. I just wanted to see how it worked. And I found that the weight dropped off for a while, and then it settled out. Didn't actually lose any more after that. At the end of 3 weeks, I hadn't drunk anything, no water, anything, and I looked that up, and I should have been dead by then. You're not supposed to live that long if you don't drink. But I felt okay, but after I looked it up and realized I was supposed to be dead, I noticed that my kidneys hurt. So then I thought, well, if my kidneys hurt, maybe I should start drinking again. So I did. It was just an experiment to see what would happen, but it seemed to work all right. I just ignored eating and drinking. I found that afterwards, though, I can kind of ignore eating or drinking, at any time. Food is optional. Now, I eat, and I sometimes get hungry, but mostly I eat because it's time, rather than because I have a real need to. Sometimes I'll get hungry and I want something to eat, but it depends. But if I get in a situation where, say, you can't eat, for some reason, you don't get to have breakfast and you don't get to have lunch, if you miss food for a day or something, it just doesn't make any difference. It truly is optional. Now, when you don't eat, when I was working, I was exercising. I didn't stop exercising. I was working out. I was doing the whole regular day for those 5 weeks. And I did notice that my energy level would go down to where I was walking a little slower. My exercise was a rolling fast walk, and I kept that pace up. But just I was a little low energy was the main result of that. So I think it's possible. Strange. There's a lot of things that are strange. Virtual realities can be very, very strange.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
I had one last question about parallel processing. I think it would be a fast one. Is the larger consciousness system parallel processing us all right now?
Well, sure, that would be one way to think about it. Yeah. I mean, we're pieces of this larger consciousness system. I break all these things up into pieces, right? There's the larger consciousness system. That's like the operating system. That's the executive, function going on there, the organizing function. And then there's all these IUOCs. But they're all really just pieces of the system. I break them out by function, but again, that's metaphor. It's just consciousness, and we're just pieces of it. So you can say that we're all, the larger conscious system is parallel processing everybody, but realize that's just a metaphor. It's a decent metaphor. But people come up with things like that, and often it becomes a fact in their mind. Oh, I know how it works. the system's, multiprocessing all of us. But it's not a fact, it's just a metaphor. It's a way to explain what you see. So mostly we speak in terms of metaphors, not in terms of facts. There are very few facts in virtual reality, and almost anything can happen. Strangest things can happen, and they just break the rules altogether.
On this 5-week fasting period, what did you experience from your? You said your body had a lower energy, but what about your mind? What difference did you see there?
If anything, probably more clarity. It's probably a little more clear, easier to focus. I found it was easier to sit at work and stay focused. I probably got more work done during that time than I would have otherwise, because I could sit in front of that computer for 10 straight hours and work. I didn't need to go eat lunch, right? I mean, I got more done that way, but it wasn't just that. It was that I was able to focus more when I wasn't eating. So that was the mental effect. But the physical effect just slowly got a little slower and slower. Didn't feel tired, but I didn't feel like if somebody said, hey, you want to join this basketball game at lunchtime? I probably said, no, I don't think so. I wasn't high energy.
Hello, Tom. My question is about creativity and the role it plays in our evolution. So if an artist creates a piece of art, he taps into his source of creativity. And similarly, when the LCS gives us a problem, presents us with a problem, we are creative by solving it. Mm-hmm. Now, are we truly able to come up with a solution, let's say, surprise the LCS, saying, oh, he just made a choice he should have made 5 years from now. He was supposed to make 5 years from now, so let's jump ahead with him, like creating something truly creative, or are we just incrementally evolving step by step, slowly, and so to say, is there a fixed order how to evolve?
We get to jump. We get to jump ahead. Mostly our society and our culture, our technology and everything just kind of chugs along little bit by little. But within that, there's lots of giant leaps of understanding and of creative inspiration that comes. And a lot of it comes from connection to the larger conscious system. If you talk to creative people, you will find they don't create with their intellect. The creation part it comes out of the intuitive part. It comes out of the being level part that I talk about, not the intellectual part. They get a sense of what it is they want to do, or the expression, or how it's going to come out, or they make it up as they go. There's not many people who do art who think of a plan, think of what they want to do, figure it all out ahead of time, and then execute it. That's not the creative process. That's an intellectual process. Creative process is a live process. It creates itself as it goes. And much of the breakthrough kind of aha moments come as downloads from outside of this reality frame. Suddenly pieces fit together. Somebody's working on a problem. This happens a lot in science. Somebody's working on a problem, things they can't understand, and they've got this evidence and that evidence, and they've got all these pieces like a jigsaw puzzle. They've got these pieces, but they can't fit them together. They can't make the connection, and they think about that. What's the connection? How do you fit them together? And with that intent, when you have an intent like that, answers often come back. And while they're in not a meditation state, because they probably don't meditate, but when they're in that calm, open state, sometimes even while they're sleeping, but mostly not, just in that mellow state where their mind is not really in charge. They're just open, pop, the answer comes, and suddenly they see the connection, and breakthrough. It's a big, it's a big thing. And if you look at science, you'll find that the key element there is intuition as far as breakthrough goes. It's not just adding the pieces. It's taking a big step. So, and authors do the same thing. They're writing books. Often that material just kind of streams to them. Oh yeah, they got to set it up and the kind of book it'll be, but they don't know how really it's going to turn out. And it often, usually turns out different than what they thought it would be when they started. And they get into that creative flow. So the creativeness comes from the fact that we get to make choices and we get to put patterns together and make connections between things. That's what makes consciousness, and all our consciousness unique. It's how we put all the stuff together and come up with something else. That's the kind of key thing that consciousness does that, computers aren't real good at. Computers can add faster than anything. They can add probably 100 million numbers together, in less than a second. But they're not real good at synthesis of a lot of seemingly unrelated things and going, aha, this is how that all goes together. They're not very good at that. Humans are pretty good at that. Computers have had a terrible time just recognizing faces. Humans can recognize a face, in a microsecond, really quick. But there's a lot of subtle things there. Computers had a hard time figuring out how to do that because it's not any one thing, you see. It's the summation of all those things means something. And computers don't work really well on that summation of all of these things put together, have a context. So, being creative is a property of consciousness. That's what we do. We can make choices and we can process data. And we do it actually very quickly. These things don't take long. They're much faster than you would think. Brains are kind of slow things. Consciousness is much faster. So when you get out of your intellect and you just open, you can get a huge amount of data in a very short amount of time. Again, mostly in a feeling, intuitive space, not so much in an intellectual space. But sometimes even in an intellectual space. Sometimes the system will just talk to you in the language of your choice. It's that direct, but most of the time it's more intuitive. That's what sets us apart with our consciousness, this is our creativity. That's kind of what makes us special. Otherwise, you're kind of a robot without the creativity.
Thank you.
Not to say anything negative about any robots that might be in the audience today, but...
Yes, hello. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I was thinking about the work you're doing at CUSAC, and I'm wondering if mainstream science is starting to take notice, and what are they saying about it? And also, I'm wondering, I hope you will be with us for a long time and do this work that you're doing, but are there other peoples in your surrounding growing to your level of experience and that can take up the work?
Okay. The first one, CUSAC and our scientists picking up on it. I suspect, other than me and maybe a handful of other scientists, we're probably the only scientists in the world who even know CUSAC exists. So no, they're not picking up on that. But what they are picking up on is the idea that this is a virtual reality and it's information-based, which is basically part of what CUSAC's trying to do. So that concept, yes, they are picking up on that. And one of the things that makes that obvious to me is that when I published my books in 2003, February 2003, there was just a couple of people in the science world that I knew of that thought virtual reality was a sane idea. Everybody else thought it was crazy. Well, this is a decade and a half later. Universities all over, and particularly in the best universities, the idea of this being a virtual reality is well accepted in physics departments. It's an acceptable attitude to have in physics departments all over the world. And when people get together in science forums to talk about it, you'll find that the people there aren't from Cornflake University. They're from, the MITs and the top schools around the world. They come from all over the place, but they typically tend to be high-end folks in the university world who think this is a really good idea, and they tend to be younger folks. So Max Planck is quoted as saying that progress in physics comes one funeral at a time. That was Max Planck's attitude when he was trying to convince other scientists that quantum mechanics was actually a real thing and not just something that was crazy. And that's still probably true. Things change slowly, and they should change slowly. Something that changed quickly would be a little reckless. Things change slowly because it takes a lot of time and effort before the inertia of opinion in science or anything else tends to turn to something else. But we're seeing that's here already. The idea that this is a virtual reality is probably the biggest change, the biggest new idea in physics for over 100 years. It's an idea whose time has come. And it's not that that's a fad now, catching on. Scientists don't like it at all. It's their drug kicking and screaming to that conclusion because that's what their experiments say. And there isn't any other way to interpret the experiment. But if you try to push them further and say, well, what does that mean? They'll just say, we don't know. And they really don't want to go there. They just know that that's what the experiments say. So yeah, that idea is growing tremendously. And I'm hoping that my experiments will just put a little more push into that acceptance. I'd say that another decade from now, that idea will dominate in physics departments. It won't be the marginal, out on the margin. It'll be the dominant understanding, probably in a decade. No more than 2. See, right now, explaining to people that this is a virtual reality is very, very difficult because it just doesn't seem to make sense. How could this be a virtual reality? How could this body be an avatar? People don't see that as something that's even rational to think about. A decade from now, certainly 2, that'll be easy sell. Won't be a hard sell at all. People have had lots of experience with virtual realities where they couldn't tell that it was any less real than this reality. They'll go into a virtual reality and they'll be on vibrating platforms and things that move and shake or whatever, and you won't know that you're not that you are in a virtual reality, except that you remembered that you got into a virtual reality. But other than that, it seems perfectly real. And after enough people experience virtual reality as being as real as this, to say that this is a virtual reality will be, yeah, that makes sense. That'll be an easy thing to understand. Now it's very hard to get people to wrap their minds around that concept. But things are changing very dramatically in that field. And as science moves to that direction, as our experience moves to confirm it, I think that will be more and more obvious conclusion because it explains so many things that aren't explainable otherwise. It solves all the major paradoxes in science. Suddenly they're not paradoxes anymore. It all works. Things that are part of our culture like placebo effect. You know, why should a doctor's bedside manner make his patients get well more often than a doctor with a poor bedside manner? You know, it doesn't have anything to do with what the doctor talks to you or how smiley he is or whatever. It's just the body. It's a machine, you see. And that shouldn't have anything to do with it, but we know that it does, and that the placebo effect is real. And people get well because of what they believe, or get hurt and sick because of what they believe. That's so obvious, but there's no explanation for that unless it's a virtual reality, and then it's easy to explain. So there's just lots of things that suddenly make sense once you get there. So I think over the next decade, we'll see a big collective aha moment come, you know, to humanity, where suddenly all the pieces fit together, and yeah, this is a virtual reality. So it's coming. Yeah. However weird it sounds right now, it's coming.